Tom,
Chip,
before we get to how Penn State is going to try to move the ball and score points against Michigan's defense, what about the other side of this, the good on good that we have in this matchup? What are the matchup points of inflection that you see when Michigan's offense goes up against Penn State? Because as we mentioned in the playoff rankings reaction show last night, the idea that this Michigan State team is not going to produce at the level that it has all season makes total sense based on the quality and the quality of the opponent and the setting of the game. So how do you see that playing out on the field?
It's going to be the most interesting aspect of this game, in my opinion, because there are, we can trash Michigan's schedule all we want, say where it's ranked, say they haven't played anybody. I think it's a little overstating it, but as I've said 1,000 times, it's not who you play, it's how you play. Michigan has played really well, but that offense, regardless of the overall quality of the teams that it's faced, if you just look at the units it's faced, the Penn State defense is a completely different animal than anybody that they have seen. And how effective will this offense, which has pretty much been able to do whatever the hell it wants against everybody it's faced, be against a Penn State defense that it's not a fluke. We've seen it dominate lesser opponents, but we also saw it give Ohio State a hell of a time a few weeks ago in that game in which the Buckeyes really struggled to move the ball effectively. And the Buckeyes they're not the same Ohio State offense we've seen in recent years, but they are still a pretty good offense. And they have guys like Marvin Harrison who pretty much bailed them out in that game. Can Michigan keep doing what it's been doing against this Penn State defense? I think the most likely outcome is they'll score points. They will not be nearly as effective as they have been. They will have to, bring out their punter a couple times, which is something they're not really accustomed to doing too much. They might see a few turnovers. Like J.J. McCarthy had the 3 turnovers against Bowling Green, and he hasn't really had them at any other point. I'm expecting he'll have 1 or 2 in this game because I think this Penn State defense is that good. But I think Penn State's defense is at its best in the front 7. I don't think the secondary is outstanding. I think the safeties are good. I think the corners are okay. I think Kalen King is having a really tough season. For somebody who was projected to be a first-round pick kind of guy, I don't think he's having the best year. It's going to be interesting to see if Michigan's receivers, guys like Roman Wilson, who have had solid years, can take advantage of that and exploit that. And if they're going to have the same kind of explosiveness in their passing game that they have had against other teams. I've also written about how, and Bud has talked about how J.J. McCarthy has really taken steps forward in his overall game of not being as reliant on play action, not being as reliant on rolling out and getting outside the pocket, and just kind of dropping back and running a quote-unquote pro-style offense. Can he do that against this team, which gets a lot of pressure and will collapse a pocket? And how will this Michigan offensive line, which is tremendous, hold up against this Penn State defensive front? I don't know. I have my suspicions, but that is the one thing that I'm really, really interested in watching this game. Because frankly, the other side, and I talked about this a little bit in the reaction show last night, I'll let you guys talk for a bit first, but I really don't think the Penn State offense is going to have a good time.
In looking at this, I'm really curious to see how Michigan reacts if and when it gets punched in the mouth, right? There is a lot of signal to doing what Michigan has done. And not signal, but there's a lot of, all right, they deserve it for being that sloppy with it. But we know what the pattern of dominant national championship teams looks like. When they play bad teams, they stomp them. It's not competitive. You can't do that. There's no just easy button to press. Okay, we're just going to be really good at stomping bad teams. So there is a lot of truth to what Michigan's been doing so far. But there is a little bit of a boiling point, if you will. When you face similar level athletes, does all of what you do, does it all translate? Do you have to do things differently? I want to see what is Michigan's plan B or plan C? I also really want to see, and we talked about this with USC a couple of weeks ago because they hadn't played very, very many decent teams. What are you holding back? What else do you have in the tank that you haven't run yet? Because you've kept it real basic and you've run very few plays. I mean, you're talking 60 plays a game in many circumstances. So what else does Michigan have that it hasn't shown in game yet? Probably quite a bit. Michigan's run game has been, I would say, good but not amazing so far relative to the competition level. The pass game and the explosives have been really nice. But if you're Penn State, to Tom's point, how much do you fear Michigan's receivers? Some. Do you have the fortitude to go and really single those guys up and bring a lot of pressure at McCarthy and see how he reacts to that? Because nobody else has really had the guys to even attempt that. So there's a lot of unknowns with this that I'm curious to see.
It's funny you mentioned the run game and maybe Michigan showing some stuff they haven't shown yet. I swear to God, I feel like Michigan's run 2 run plays all season long.
Yes.
I also think, you know what else you haven't seen, which just in a numbers game, is the J.J. McCarthy run game. Like adding the quarterback element to it, where even if you go back last season against the better defenses they played, all of a sudden his rushing attempts go up, whether it's designed or scrambled. That's an aspect of Michigan's offense that I think you could see more of in this game, and I would expect JJ, his legs to kind of be that difference. Penn State, watching them against Ohio State, they did a really good job. Now, Kyle McCord is not the quarterback that J.J. McCarthy is. J.J. McCarthy, much more experienced, much better decision maker. He's been much more consistent. But we all thought the difference in that game was Penn State didn't have Marvin Harrison Jr. Does Michigan have a Marvin Harrison Jr. that can pick it up? Is Roman Wilson that guy? Is it somebody else that in a lower scoring game steps up and make that play? I don't think they do, which is why I think Penn State can keep this defensive, a defensively ugly game where they kind of contain, don't give up the big plays that they gave up to Ohio State. It's at home, potentially make some plays on defense, because I don't see Penn State lighting up the scoreboard either. I think Drew Aller will play better than he did against Ohio State, but I don't envision them putting up a ton of points. And then can your defense, which they did at Ohio State, there was a penalty on the holding call, but they did create a scoop and score in that game that was called back that could have been massive for Penn State. So, when I look at that, I think Manny Diaz is going to have to create some havoc, has to get to J.J. McCarthy, has to rattle him. They've got to do something on the defensive side of the ball to almost win this game.
You mentioned, can Roman Wilson be the Marvin Harrison? That's the one. That's another interesting matchup for this one, because Michigan lines Roman up in the slot a lot more often than they put him on the outside. And that's where Penn State's been putting Cam Miller most of the year. And I think Cam Miller has been their best corner. So that's kind of like a really interesting matchup there. And how will they kind of take Roman Wilson out? Because, Morris is good. Johnson is good. Barner's a good tight end. But Wilson really is in the passing game kind of like the really explosive, dangerous threat coming out of the slot, finding, mismatches. I don't know if those mismatches are going to be there as frequently against Penn State. And how does Penn State and Manny Diaz disguise what they're doing? Because, they're going to be pressure. That's just what they do.
So last season, one thing that, my memories of last season, I was kind of piecing it together. I always thought that Michigan was sending Jake Moody out there a lot. Felt like Michigan got into scoring opportunities a lot and kicked a lot of field goals. And, when I went back to look at it, the numbers backed it up, because sure, Iowa led the Big Ten in the field goal percentage and red zone opportunities. That doesn't come as a huge surprise, but Michigan was kicking a lot of field goals, a lot more field goals than they do this year. The red zone offense, in terms of how often they convert those opportunities into touchdowns, has improved by a lot. Penn State, also a very good red zone team. And it made me think about the mentality of this, because, and this sort of leads us into the other side, can you imagine a scenario where Michigan simply does not believe that Penn State will score more than 17 points and just doesn't even, more willing to play field position, more willing to kick field goals, not necessarily trying to throw that hammer in a way where we look up, because obviously big noon game, this is going to be like a 4.5 hour game despite only having 33 points, right? We're going to look up it's
6 o'clock.
Yeah, we're going to look up at the start of the fourth quarter at 6 o'clock. And we're going to say, Penn State's just a play or two away, even though it might have been the kind of game that has always felt like Michigan is dominating. If Michigan comes out throwing haymakers, being aggressive, hitting home run plays, to me, I think it's night-night. Because I do, at least, I would agree with Michigan's, hypothesis. Penn State's not going to score 20 points against us. But I would also be worried if I was a Michigan fan that being too conservative in that belief could maybe get you got if you're always staying one play away.
So two little things here. How much of last week was Penn State and how much was Maryland?
A lot of it was
Because there's like Maryland fans on Twitter who are like, hey, Maryland quit.
I
You know,
watched
and,
it.
like,
Looked
they were-
like they'd kind
a
of
lot
They
of
were
it was
jogging
Maryland.
around.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so how much do we want to impute that, success to Penn State? And how much do we want to say, hey, that had a lot to do with Maryland? And we watch for that, because if you believe that Penn State's offense is improving during the season, which is not crazy to think, right? It really could be. You got a first-year starter in Drew. The other part that I'm very curious is, like, how bad does Michigan beat up Penn State on the inside with this defensive line? Because I've talked to guys who have played Michigan, and like they've told me, like, man, Michigan seems to have the dudes inside that Georgia had last year, like high-level draft picks. And Ohio State kind of had their way. I mean, Tyleik Williams, and Hall had a pretty nice game. I think Michigan's got those guys and more on the inside. So we'll see if Penn State can hold up with guard and center spots.
They've got Norzad at center, where did he transferred from, like Harvard? He transferred from an Ivy League school. I can't remember which one.
Yeah.
He's held up pretty well at center, but their guards have not been very good. And yeah, that is
Jenkins, Grant, Graham.
They're decent. So that's going to be an interesting matchup to watch too. And the other thing is, like, we're talking about Penn State's offense. It's Penn State's explosive play rate on the season is 9.4%. That ranks 120th. In the passing game, they're 11.7%. That ranks 119th. Run, they're ranking 109th. Here's a fun stat for you. I've mentioned 1,000 times that Michigan's defense has not faced a first and goal. Do you know what the average distance of the touchdown scored against Michigan is this year? 44.3 yards. Unless you make an explosive play against them because there's a miscommunication or you just make a play, you don't score. Penn State, to this point, has not shown any ability to put together those kind of plays. So if Penn State has to go 7, 8, 9 plays for 75 yards, they're not going to do it. They simply can't. Nobody has been able to do it against Michigan. And also, Michigan can get pressure on Penn State in a way that nobody else has to this point. And Drew Aller, under pressure, I mean, everybody's worse under pressure than they are without it, but his completion percentage drops to 38.9%. In 4 games against Ohio State, we saw this. He was 6 for 20 under pressure for 80 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 sacks. He does a good job of not panicking and turning the ball over, but he doesn't complete passes. And they have allowed only 94 pressures on the year as a team, but 59 of them came against West Virginia, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio State. What do those 4 teams have in common? They're the only 4 good defensive lines Penn State has faced all season long. So that's going to be a huge problem for them, because we saw it. Like, maybe being at home, he'll be more comfortable, but in the pocket against Ohio State, that man was every word you can think of that was the opposite of the word comfortable.